People often wonder why I keep my first marriage locked away like a forgotten relic. They want the dramatic rumor they heard secondhand. The infamous story about how my ex-husband ended up in urgent care just 48 hours after we said our vows. That part is true, but it is not what haunts me. What haunts me are the silent days before the blow-up. Back when I was still trying to keep the peace by shrinking myself into nothing. My name is Clara. And I grew up in a quiet rural county where my dad ran an informal weekend self-defense class out of our barn. He started teaching me when I was 9 years old, not out of fear, but because he believed a daughter should never feel helpless. It was just our normal Saturday routine, no different than soccer practice or piano lessons. I never imagined those casual mornings in the dust and sawdust would one day save my life. When I met Caleb at 26, he seemed completely harmless. He was soft-spoken, worked for his father building supply business, and remembered tiny details like my favorite order at the local diner. My mother adored him instantly, which looking back, should have been my first warning sign. We dated for a year without a single major red flag, completely unaware of the hidden family dynamic waiting for me just beneath the polished surface. The evening before our wedding, my mother pulled me aside to offer some sobering advice. She warned me that Caleb's family was deeply traditional and that his mother, Loretta, ran their household with an iron fist. She told me to just keep my head down and pick my battles later. In the very same breath, she mentioned her own mortgage was finally paid off, a random comment that seemed harmless at the time, but would soon reveal its true, sinister weight. Our wedding went smoothly enough, filled with polite applause and a brief, cryptic toast from my father about Caleb needing to handle what he was getting into. But reality shattered on our second morning at his parents' estate. Loretta walked into the kitchen while I was making toast, demanding to know why breakfast was not fully prepared for the men yet. Her tone was cold, and I quickly realized there was a long, unwritten list of rules I was expected to obey without question. Every time I asked a simple question or tried to establish basic boundaries, the entire family treated me like a rebellious trespasser. Caleb refused to stand up for me, casually waving off his mother's toxic behavior as just her way. When I confronted him in private about doing all the heavy chores while everyone else watched, he told me it was simply easier if I did not make a scene. That single sentence proved he cared more about his own comfort than my well-being. The breaking point arrived late one evening after Caleb came home reeking of beer and fuming over some unseen grievance. He stumbled into our bedroom, slammed the door, and violently knocked over a glass of water on my nightstand. When I calmly asked him to keep it down because it was midnight, he snapped. He spun around with sudden fury and swung his heavy fist straight toward my face, ending any illusion of our marriage. My body reacted purely on instinct, executing the moves my father taught me years ago without conscious thought. I ducked beneath his wild swing and planted two sharp, powerful blows, one into his exposed ribs and another right to his jaw. He collapsed onto the rug holding his side, wheezing in utter shock. When his parents burst into the room moments later, Loretta immediately began screaming at me, while his father looked at me with cold hatred. They rushed Caleb to an urgent care clinic for bruised ribs and a split lip from hitting the nightstand on his way down. I naively hoped the violent outburst would force his family to address his aggression, but I was completely wrong. Loretta threatened to call the authorities on me, while his father, Arthur, declared that no woman had ever laid a hand on a man in their family. Not once did anyone acknowledge that Caleb had tried to strike me first. The true motive behind their hostility surfaced shortly after, connecting back to a strange conversation. A few days prior, Arthur had casually pried into whether my mother owned her property outright. The morning after the physical fight, my terrified mother called to report that Arthur relatives had just shown up at her house with old legal documents, claiming a county right-of-way ran straight through her land and threatening to seize her property for a road expansion. Overwhelmed and desperate, I drove into town to figure out how to defend my mother from this sudden land grab. By chance, I bumped into Silas, an old training partner from my father's Saturday classes who had recently become a legal aid attorney. We sat at a diner, and I poured out the whole story. Silas took one look at the paperwork, told me not to sign anything, and promised to investigate the sudden claim thoroughly. It took weeks of digging, but Silas uncovered that the land easement claim was completely fabricated with forged dates and invalid signatures. Once he pressed the county clerk, the entire fraudulent suit quietly vanished into thin air. They had clearly manufactured the legal threat to intimidate my mother and force me into submission. But their scheme fell apart the moment we stood our ground and fought back with real legal representation. The divorce proceedings were long and quiet, ending with Caleb quietly accepting the terms behind closed doors. He knew any public fight would expose his attempt to strike me and his family land fraud scheme. I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment near town and took a humble job stocking shelves at a local market. It was simple work, but it offered me something priceless: peace, safety, and complete independence from control. A year later, I ran into a frail-looking Loretta in the grocery store aisle. She confessed that Caleb had lost his job after a public incident and was spiraling down a dark path, while Arthur's health was rapidly failing. Instead of yelling, she quietly begged me to ask Silas if he knew of any out-of-state work for Caleb. Holding on to bitter anger was only hurting me, so I asked Silas, who managed to find Caleb a basic shop job miles away. I have not spoken to any of them since that day, and I finally have the tranquility I deserve. People always look for a neat, inspirational lesson in stories like mine. But the truth is simpler. Hard times do not magically make you stronger, they simply reveal who people truly are when you stop being useful to them. I will forever be grateful for those Saturday mornings in the barn, because when violence crossed my path, my body already knew I was worth defending. If you appreciate raw, honest personal stories told without unnecessary drama, make sure to hit the subscribe button and join our community. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to sharing the next chapter with you very soon.